on there somewhere. So in a moment, we're going to kick off with my presentation on active travel. You can see here the slide on the housekeeping. So like we said, this is going to be recorded and pushed out onto social media. So by all means, you can turn your cameras off if you don't want to be on there. But at the end of the session, the recording will stop and you can turn your cameras on if you have any questions. Andy is going to be monitoring the chat, like he said. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in that chat. The way my system's set up, I can't see much going on, but I always welcome little claps, thumbs up. It's always good to chip me on a little bit. So feel free to do that if you need to. And just to avoid background interference, if you could just go on to mute, that would be great. Thank you. So like Andy said, I'm a paramedic in the Southwest region, and I've been seconded to NHS England for the year to work with the Chief Sustainability Officer. I'm currently being hosted up in Yorkshire, and I'm looking at sustainability and sort of environmentalism within the greener NHS. And I was given a blank canvas to look at any projects I wanted to. So being interested already in active travel and cycling, I thought I would look to introduce e-bikes into primary care. And the reason for that is because last year I worked within primary care as a visiting paramedic and did all of my home visits predominantly on e-bike, which was just amazing. It's a really good opportunity to engage in patients and their families around why I decided to ride to their property over a conventional car, and just got us talking about population health, the individual's health, and sort of environmental, the benefits of doing so. So that's the background of why I chose active travel and to push into primary care, and that's why I still beat the drum. This presentation, there's about 19 slides. It's about half an hour or so. It's one I've put out before to primary care workforce when I've done lunch and learn meetings and the like. And briefly, we're going to outline the project. We're going to have a bit of a recap on the effects of air pollution on population health. I've got some statistics from South Yorkshire, which I'll share with you. And then we're going to also look at that intrinsic link between inactivity on the body with air pollution. And then we talk a little bit about perceived and actual dangers and risks associated with being on a bicycle. Okay. So the project I'm looking at is across South and West Yorkshire. Initially started out as a 4-week trial, but for some surgeries now that's going to be pushed to a 12-week trial. And we have 9 doctors' surgeries involved so far, which is also covering 15 e-bikes. So between those 9 surgeries, we have 15 e-bikes which are being loaned out predominantly by local authority active travel hubs, albeit for one practice that are going to be using Cycling UK. So essentially the bikes are loaned out for free of charge for that period. There's been some pre-acceptance questionnaires put out, and there's going to be some post questionnaires also put out towards the end of the period of the pilot to try and identify what people thought of the project, what the barriers were, any benefits they noted in themselves. Within this package that we're offering is sort of demo journey rides, so happy to go out to these surgeries and provide some demonstration rides during the working day to show just how safe and efficient riding a bike is during working hours. And there's going to be some discussions around the metrics measured within these surgeries. So predominantly distances covered, the amount of time the bike or bikes are used, the amount of time bikes were chosen not to be used. So we were also interested to find out if the bikes weren't used, what was the predominant reason? Was it bad weather? Was it perceived time to get to and from a destination? So there's going to be many sort of metrics measured during this trial. And this is all going to accumulate with the launch, which is for Clean Air Day, which is June the 20th. So some surgeries have already received their e-bike or e-bikes already now in the build up to Clean Air Day. Some are still waiting to receive the bikes, but essentially we want all 9 surgeries using the bikes on Clean Air Day, because there's going to be some promotion around that as well. Okay, so let's just have a think about mileage used within primary care, and maybe you might know the answer to this, but if I was to tell you that the National Health Service fleet is the 2nd largest fleet in the country, would anyone have a guess which service in the country might have more vehicles than the National Health Service? Any ideas? Feel free to put your answer in the chat. Jackie, yeah, Jackie got it. I think Jackie knew it. Yeah, so the post service has about 20,000 vehicles, and we come in close behind. And the National Health Service travels around about 450 to 460 million miles every year. Okay, so with that sort of information in mind, what do you think the answer would for the estimated annual mileage for primary care grey fleet would be? So this is doctors and nurses, phlebotomists within primary care using cars to travel around for their home visits and business sort of miles. Do you think it's 10 million, 50 million, 90 million, or 155 million miles? Any ideas? Who's going to be brave and put something in the chat?
We've got 10,000 in the chat.
No, 10 million. So
10 million,
yeah,
sorry.
Yeah, Anna's gone 10 million. Jess has gone 50 million. Alex has gone 50 million. Yeah, these are all great answers, aren't they? How do I minimize them? Yeah, so the answer is 155 million miles. So we're putting out a vast number of miles, and the number's almost inconceivable. I've tried to explain this, like how many laps around the planet would be, or which planet could you get to. It doesn't mean a great deal to people. We just know it's a lot of miles traveled and a lot of pollution being put up into the air. So that's our baseline. That's what we need to work on. And what I'm trying to do within South Yorkshire, which is that, you know, a stone in a pond, is just to try and get this conversation and the beginning of some big movement. Okay, so this is where we're currently at. Well, let's be thinking about air pollution to begin with. So historically then, the main air pollution problems in both our developed and developing nations has typically been high levels of smoke and sulfur dioxide from like sulfur containing fossil fuels such as coal. What's happened in recent years is these days the major threat to clean air is now posed by traffic emissions, because globally we're seeing a 5% increase year on year of car production, which currently sits at around 85 million new cars produced every year, which is also the same number as cars in the UK. We sit at about 85 million cars in the UK. So the cars with those internal combustion engines emit all sorts of pollution, principally carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, and particulate matter 2.5 and 10. And there are many others. And these all have an impact, or an increasing impact, on our urban air quality. You also get these photochemical reactions with nitrogen dioxide, which can lead to another secondary pollutant called ozone, which is interesting because that can travel vast distances. So it really affects rural areas. You've also got some pollution or air pollution problems which we don't contribute to ourselves. So these natural sources such as wildfires, volcanoes, dust storms, and sea spray, which can give off, for example, particulate matter. So basically, what we're seeing in our generation is this transition, if you like, from a fossil fuel dependent species, I suppose, to this transition to sustainable living. So, you know, for the next generation and generations thereafter, hopefully we're going to see, you know, more renewable energy, more sustainable energy as we transition away, and active travel would form a part of that process. Okay, so when we think about the World Health Organization and all of the publications they put out there, someone might notice that they would say that air pollution is the something environmental threat to human health. Any ideas what that would say? Air pollution is the something of environmental threat to human health.
We've got single biggest, most immediate.
Yes, very good. So single greatest, absolutely. So it is, and again, this comes down to this rise in travel with those internal combustion engine vehicles as we transition away from coal-powered, generation of electricity. So when we talk about things like nitrogen dioxide, particulate matter, and so forth, and NOx, then we need to understand like the measure of units. So these things are microscopic. You can't see them with the naked eye. They're tiny, and we often hear about these different levels per cubic meter or per cubic feet. So I thought maybe just one slide to define what we're talking about. So you can see a grain of sand here on the picture, and some PM 2.5 and PM 10 to give you some idea of context of size. So these things are tiny. And they're typically measured in units of mass, so milligrams, micrograms, nanograms per volume of cubic meter or feet of air. And a milligram represents a thousandth of a gram. So you can see here that we have, for example, PM 2.5. The World Health Organization would say that the limit should be 5 micrograms per cubic meter of air. So these are tiny, tiny particles within a cubic meter of air. However, when they accumulate, they can pose problems for our general health, which we're going to find out. So we're just going to park the air pollution to one side, but we are going to revisit it in a few slides. Sitting alongside that air pollution caused by travel and the way we move around as a species, we also need to think about our mobility, which will feed into active travel and how that plays out in terms of a threat to our health. So biologically, we're still hunter-gatherer. A species used to move around constantly on the move, that nomadic sort of, moving around, following the seasons, the animals, the blossoms, eventually mastering farming about 12,000 years ago, and then the formation of sort of societies. Essentially, we've sort of slowed down, and that range of movement or the distances we travel has also vastly been reduced. Here's some statistics I got from government websites in terms of active travel. That 18% of individuals, which is about 10 million people, for less than once a year, walk continuously for more than 20 minutes, which is about the distance you'd cover about a mile in that time. So 10 million people, less than one time a year, don't walk for more than 20 minutes. And 33 million people, or 44% of the population, walk continuously for less than 10 minutes per month. So we're not moving around much as a species. When we're not moving around, what are we doing? We might be sat at desks, for example, or stood up doing something, but we're not moving around. And that sort of fits into this statistic about car journeys, that 58 to 71% of car journeys are under 5 miles, and nearly a quarter are under 2 miles. So these amazing machines that we've designed and we use are really being used for very short distances. So like I say, active travel has been designed out of our lives. And when we think about the architecture and the structure of our societies and how and where we live, like towns and villages and cities, you can sort of understand how that sort of happened, and the way it's been designed around the car, the way roads have been built, and the way we get to and from our places of work, and when we do our habits such as shopping and such. When we think about buildings we go into, often you'll find the elevator at pole position. The stairs, for example, don't take centre stage. So, like I said, active travel has been designed out of our lives. This slide, again, is from Green NHS. It talks about the sustainable travel hierarchy. It has digital communications at the top. If you like, it's the order of priority towards modal shift. So where possible, we should be looking to do things like digital communications. Again, that will have its own embodied emissions, but if it saves a physical journey somewhere, probably most likely by car or something, then it's going to be much better for the carbon savings. Walking and wheeling, and where I'm interested in it is cycling to get around. And this is the slide I use when I'm talking to primary care. So primary care already uses, for example, digital communication for some appropriate patient consultations. Not so much walking to and from patients' addresses, but certainly GPs and nurses are up on their feet, walking to and from to greet patients. And then this is where I fit in now. It's about cycling to and from those short distances to meet patients, to do consultations in the community. Interestingly, when I think about primary care, that we have nearly a third of doctors' surgeries are situated in areas which exceed safe levels of air pollution. So the very fact that these surgeries are in the areas of population health, looking after their patients with lung problems, we need to really think about how we can reduce the local air pollution. Like I said earlier, 460 million miles from the NHS, sort of grey fleet miles, accounts for 14% of all NHS emissions. But my focus really is on South and West Yorkshire. When I did some sort of background reading around statistics in terms of home visits to see if this was plausible and worthwhile doing, they average in the region of 4,500 to 5,200 home visits per month. And the average distance from my own experiences of working within a PCN in sort of Gloucestershire is the average home visit is anywhere between 3 miles and further, sometimes less. But around like 5 kilometres would be like an average sort of distance to travel to see a patient. So when I have these conversations with the nurses and the doctors, when I'm having these sort of these conversations around introducing an e-bike, they say to me, "Yeah, but Andy, you know, 3 miles, you know, how long will that take me to get on the bike? Or in a mile, how long? It's much quicker, isn't it, to get into the car?" But you'd be surprised. So 3 miles at 15 miles an hour, and I chose 15 miles an hour because e-bikes are sort of set to that limit of 15 sort of and a half miles an hour, which is ample speed. So we're talking a few minutes, 12 minutes to cover 3 miles, 4 minutes for a mile. So we're talking quick times. And certainly in that urbanized area, getting around on bike from my own experience was always quicker than driving in the car in terms of finding the keys, getting in, exiting the car park, being stuck at traffic lights, traffic, and then finding somewhere to park. More times than not, it was quicker to go by bike because I avoided most of those problems. So having this data has been really useful to try and persuade GP practices to consider the idea of trialing the e-bike. And now, like I say, we're at the stage now where some surgeries are receiving their bikes and they're moving on to the next stage. So in South Yorkshire in particular, so there's 184 surgeries in South Yorkshire, and over the year they average just over 5,000 home visits per month. Now, if this modelling is based on using, say, a conventional car to do those home visits, then in South Yorkshire alone, they'd be putting out just under 2.25 tonnes of CO2 equivalent emissions per month across the South Yorkshire region if they were to use conventional methods. Now, you know, I'm not expecting all 184 surgeries to use an e-bike 100% of the time for home visits. It would be impractical, you know. However, if they were to do so, then they would slash that figure by about 20 times and bring the carbon emissions down for South Yorkshire region to just 110 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per month. So the e-bike has a massive saving in terms of, you know, embodied emissions, well to tank sort of criteria in terms of how much tailpipe emissions and embodied emissions within the design and construction of the bikes, delivery of the bikes. So e-bikes are much more, I guess, efficient on lots of metrics. So just a CO2 comparison chart, which again I use within primary care to show where an e-bike would sit in terms of its CO2 equivalent emissions per kilometre. And when you look at it compared to, say, an average petrol car, again, it's vastly there's a vast improvement in terms of CO2 equivalent emissions. So some of the feedback I've had from the doctors and the nurses who are considering trialing these e-bikes is, yeah, but you know, what about powering these e-bikes, Andy? You know, it's all, you know, I'm going to need more calories to get around, and that's also got embodied emissions within the food production and so forth for the food. And they're absolutely right, there is. But again, it's not on the same level as using a traditional car. But it got us thinking about how we do power, and what's the link between being active and having the energy and ability to if you like cycle. So when I think about the combi, you know, the capabilities and the opportunities and the motivation, you know, are people capable of riding e-bikes? Yes, they are, absolutely. They're like magic carpets. You know, they assist the rider to turn those cranks, to get the pedals to get the wheels moving. We got onto the subject of mitochondria and how the main site of energy production within our cell isn't just used for muscle contraction and movement, but it's for all processes within the cell. But interestingly, as you get older, through the aging process, there is a decrease in the amount of mitochondria, and the function of those diminishes. So by doing exercise or being active in life is a strong way to rejuvenate the mitochondria, and exercise also stimulates and removes older mitochondria on the body. So if you want to stay active in life and live well in older age, then absolutely being active and cycling in that instance is a good thing to do. Which gets us onto inflammation in the context of active travel. You might be thinking, well, where does inflammation fit into all of this? And we have, like, I guess, two forms. We have acute inflammation and chronic inflammation. And we're probably all used to the acute inflammation, where we have an injury or an infection, and we have that response, and then that inflammatory response sort of goes away over time. But with aging, we're dealing with that chronic inflammation, which persists for decades, and that's where it becomes harmful, because it can damage blood vessels and increase the chance of cardiovascular disease, and it also reduces the ability of insulin to reduce blood glucose, so we can develop things like insulin resistance. And we're also dealing with a population who's becoming multi-morbid. I would say that pretty much all age-related diseases has a link somewhere with inflammation or chronic inflammation. So lifelong exercise helps. Not only does it help in terms of well-being and stress levels, but also keeps down inflammation by dampening it down. So it's helping our immune system, it's helping our cardiovascular system. So it's about moving away from the idea of moving away from using the word exercise in the context of active travel, and trying to rephrase it as sort of moving and enjoying it. We need to move more to reduce muscle wastage, because skeletal muscle wastage is a major regulator. Muscle wastage reduces the ability to muscle mass is a major regulator of the immune system. So it's not ideal to lose muscle mass. If we lose muscle mass, then we lose the ability to regulate the immune system. So moving, if you like, helps the muscles stay healthy. So it's about keeping active, keeping moving. Of course, these are the conversations we have with the patients when we go out into the community to deal with them and to assess them and to give them their consultations. It's having that conversation, and often arriving by bike or walking is an easy segue into having those conversations, because people are becoming immobile and sedentary at an increasingly young age, and this is partly down to a lack of aerobic exercise, because exercise has been sold to us over those years as being hard, there's been a punishment, trying to work off calories that you ate or drank too much of. So sometimes there's a negative connotation to it, that sort of no pain, no gain. And part of the work I'm doing with the doctors and nurses is to try and reframe how good exercise makes you feel. It's something that you should be looking forward to doing. There's evidence from Professor Marie Murphy that short, vigorous bouts of exercise are really good for you. So it's taking those opportunities to, for example, run up the stairs, do some brisk walking, standing up from the chair from time to time. It's about making exercise fit into your normal life, making it a habit, as opposed to trying to schedule exercise into your day, like going to a gym, for example. They call it vigorous intermittent lifestyle physical activity, or VILPA. It's about trying to make it routine and not schedule it into your life. A bit like brushing your teeth is routine and habit, so would be like this vigorous short intermittent exercise. Steve Blair, a professor, also talks about what's the best form of exercise, and he says that it's the one that you do all the time, one that you won't forget. And it's about taking opportunities that present themselves. So, for example, taking the set of stairs rather than the lift, for example. It's about focusing on muscles, and in particular the forgotten mantra of looking after muscle strength and building strength in muscles, because as I mentioned earlier, as we get older, our muscles shrink. So things like your quads and your glutes start to shrink as well. And that's really important as you get into older age, because without good strength in your quads and glutes, then there's, it leads to frailty and sort of the inability to rise from a chair. And we know that over 50% of people over 65 years of age don't have that sufficient strength to get up from a chair unaided, which is worrying. So again, active travel, not only is it good for the planet, but it staves off long-term chronic illness and keeps you fit and healthy in later age. So as we started off this presentation earlier, when we talked about air pollution, as we go through age from sort of things like, from being a fetus right through to old age, you can see air pollution is having an effect on all of us from the point of conception. So it harms all of us. It knows no boundaries. And it's especially harmful if you're really young or really old, or you have an existing lung condition. Some types of air pollution, like the particulate matter 2.5, can get really deep into our lungs. It can cause inflammation. And again, if you have asthma or COPD, then this can also be a trigger. Experts estimate that air pollution can contributes up to 21% of all stroke deaths worldwide. And in England alone, experts predict it could contribute over 100,000 strokes by 2035. It can also have an effect on diabetes, like I said earlier, with insulin resistance. And then when we look at the health effects of inactivity through life, you can see there's really much crossover here as well. It's about changing the way we move around as adults. Leading by example for our younger generations can have a really profound impact. It's about trying to demonstrate to the younger populations, to school-aged children, that actually being mobile and active is really good, not only for for your health, but also for the planet. In the UK, just staying on the theme of children, 70% of parents who drive their children to school cite danger from cars as the main reason, even as their own transport choice adds to the problem. And it's about understanding that not only does that rob children the opportunity of mobility, but it takes away freedoms to move about without relying on their parents. And this can lead to things like obesity, which affects 1 in 4 children in the UK and increases the likelihood of children developing health problems such as diabetes, liver conditions, and sort of breathing problems, mental health problems. The number of children living with obesity, it almost doubles from the start of primary school to the end of primary school. And 500,000 children in England are affected by excess weight or obesity, with over 1 million who are eligible for NHS sort of treatment according to NICE guidelines. So active travel also plays a part in just setting the scene for healthy lifestyles. So we've talked a bit about the air pollution. We've looked at some numbers for South Yorkshire and the sort of the benefits it would have of reducing emissions. Some of the barriers we've come across is really, it's risky behaviour. The roads are dangerous. There are too many accidents. It's not for me. I sort of want to go home alive. So it's about trying to balance the risk and the reward of being active in life, and in particular using an e-bike. And we know from evidence, and with Active Travel England, that one of the main barriers to people riding in the UK is fear of being knocked off the bike or danger. So a lot of work and investments coming from Active Travel England. We know about LTM 120s and segregated cycle lanes. People want to feel safer and riding their bike. But it's interesting when having these conversations within primary care about how we set the scene and we give some statistics to help, to make this case that actually riding a bike is okay as long as we understand and take some precautions. Because we live in a world of risk. We're told that a good diet and lifestyle cuts the risk of cancers and heart disease, that if we drive too fast can risk lives, that doing short interval training is good for us, and that riding to and from work is all good for us. But how do we weigh up all these apparent threats and decide which ones not to lose sleep over? So in 2018, 48 children pedestrians were killed on the road. In 2021, there were 277 drownings in the UK, the majority of which those people could swim. And in a year later, in 2022, 85 cyclists were killed on the road. So these are big numbers. But those 85 cyclists who were killed on the road in 2022, it works out that as an average of 22 cyclists per billion miles cycled. So the number becomes quite small per person. We can quantify risk in a way by using micromorts, and a micromort is defined as a 1 in a million chance of sudden death. So one micromort is a 1 in a million chance of sudden death. So for example, looking at statistics, driving 250 miles in a car has a risk of 1 micromort. So you have a 1 in a million chance of dying at the wheel if you drive over 250 miles. In terms of cycling, you would need to cycle at least 20 miles continuously to equal 1 micromort. So if I go for a 20-mile bike ride, there's a 1 in a million chance I will die on that ride. The same is true of going skiing, taking ecstasy, or decorating your home on a set of high ladders. All carry 1 micromort. So it's trying to give it some context. If I was to tell you that the risk of dying from a general anaesthetic in an emergency operation is quoted as a 1 in 100,000 chance, then we can expect 10 deaths for every million operations from the anaesthetic alone, and that's described as 10 micromorts. And we can compare that figure to other averages, such as skydiving, which is also 10 micromorts. So this, if you like, is the acute risk of doing something, and it's described as a micromort. So cycling is 1 micromort for every 20 miles. Emergency anaesthesia is 10 micromorts. On the other hand, we also have chronic risk, and this is measured in something called microlives. And a microlife is 30 minutes of your life expectancy. So if we have unhealthy habits in life, it's going to cost us some microlives. So for example, smoking. If you smoke a cigarette, then you lose approximately half a microlife. So that's 15 minutes of your life. If you smoke 20 cigarettes a day, then you're losing on average 10 microlives. For every extra 5 kilograms of weight you carry is also 10 microlives. So we need to understand that the major difference between a micromort and a microlife is that if you survive that bike trip, then your micromort gets forgotten and you start the next day with a clean slate. But if we continue with a sedentary lifestyle, or a lifestyle in which we're breathing in air pollution, then those microlives accumulate from day to day. The UK statistics show that the roads are getting safer. In 2001, there was 219 deaths on the roads. And like I said, in 2018, there were 48 deaths. And we have around about 10 million children at school. So why are we so scared? So it comes back to this idea of being travel decisions are based on perceived dangers and not statistics. So me having those conversations with doctors and nurses around micromorts and microlives and giving them some figures, we're trying to allay the fears in conjunction with trying to find pilot sites where we have LTM 120 segregated pathways already in place is proving to be a sort of a popular way to get bikes into practices. But there are things we can also do when we're riding our bikes on roads without segregated lanes. It's about where we position ourselves on the bikes. And I went to an interesting talk a few months back now by Professor Ian Walker, who did a study on drivers overtaking cyclists and the influence that the bike rider's appearance has on overtaking proximity. So it would appear from the study by Professor Walker that the closer we ride to the curb, the more likely the car will pass you within 1.5 meters, sometimes as close as 80 centimeters. And of course, if that car hits you at 40 miles an hour, there's a 90% chance you're going to die. If it's 30 miles an hour, there's a 20% chance. And if it's 20 miles an hour, there's a 2.5% chance. So it really is about where we position ourselves on the road. So the general rule is that the further out into the road you ride, the wider the berth that the car driver will give you. So it's about changing behaviours of the motorist. And in fact, the highway code also supports this idea of riding in the centre of your lane to allow that car driver to treat you as another road user and to give you a safe space to travel. So that's the end of that presentation there. I'm now going to stop sharing my presentation, he says. And I'm going to see if we have any